I think it is important to note in our culture, when the word feminine is used, people automatically think we're talking about women. This was not so in ancient cultures. The Indian Hindus knew that they were working towards a balance between Shiva and Shakti in divine embrace. In China, the yin and the yang were always, the attempt was made to bring them into balance. Those of you who do the I Ching, that is the whole understanding behind balancing the yin with some yang, the yang with some yin. In the Christian world, we go to the abstract to balance the transcendent and the immanent. Yes, we do need a new vocabulary. These two words are too tied to sexuality. Masculine and feminine have become sexual words. But the fact remains that in our dreams, the masculinity is imaged in the male, the femininity is imaged in the female. Instead of putting all our energy into worrying about new language, we need also to look at the dreams, where the macho man is raping the feminine in himself, in other people, in the earth, or where the woman, the phallic woman, is doing the same thing, raping the feminine in herself, in her man, and in Mother Earth. What does it look like in a man when his femininity begins to develop? When his growing anima begins to separate out from mother? When that cold cat begins to develop a sweet and loving face? When he is no longer interested in his Don Juan escapades? How does his outer attitude change? When the little boy has outgrown the phallic witch and the deadening laws of patriarchy? What happens when he begins to experience his own values in his own being? Being is the feminine principle. Doing is the masculine principle. For me, patriarchy has become a parody of masculinity. It is focused on power. Power over, even power over one's own body. Masculinity is a focused, discriminating, fiery, creative energy that loves the feminine, cherishes the feminine. If the feminine principle were present at the board table, how would it change our ecological laws? What would happen to modern pig farms, chicken farms, stockyards? What would happen on our whole planet if we could believe that God has a wife? While you are looking at our shadow nose, it is important to remember that the shadow is not always dark, mean, dangerous, evil. Shadow for Jung means those parts of the same gender self that are still in the unconscious, unknown to our conscious ego. These can be parts of ourselves that have been put down since we were tiny children. Parts of ourselves that we were made fun of, bewildered by, kept out of a peer group. We buried these parts and hoped we would never see them again. Forgotten them. Often the sad part is that they are in our unconscious. And like ugly little toads, they come splatting out. We don't even know we've said them, but we suddenly realize that everyone around us is angry. We don't understand why. It's very important sometimes to talk to each other about our little toads. Now the shadow is the same gender as the ego. We're going to move now to the contrasexual in the man, what Jung calls the anima, the Latin word for soul. This is the part of him that will become the divine inner energy. It can move in several directions. As we look at this anima, she can move, well, let me use this. As we look at this anima, and you see how this pendulum swings, you can see that there is a ratio on both sides, that it does move the same on the one side as on the other. Think of a complex that way. Think of a person who is projecting a goddess, a divine goddess, onto someone, and the energy becomes shifting because she is not a divine goddess, she is human. But that is a terrible disappointment to the person. So the other side comes up, and she may appear as an enchantress, someone who will not let him go, or even an animal, often a sick animal, who will not let him go, or something that will keep him asleep. The relationship to the mother will determine the relationship to this contrasexual. And one has to always be aware that the more intense on the positive side, the equally intense negative energy. Jung realized that the young feminine would be, as it were, a shadow side of that mother energy. When she begins to appear in dreams, often it's a little girl or a young girl or a little dark girl, and she comes out, and of course the energy may be projected. That's the tendency. What's coming out of the unconscious is projected onto someone. But that's fine, because then we begin to see who that is in us, what we are projecting. Now, she may say to you, if you're a man, that's not who I am at all. But from your point of view, yes, indeed, that is who she is, because that is your projection. We don't project intentionally. It's like an arrow that just comes out, flies directly to the bullseye, and then the two people involved have to deal with that. When the energy becomes that one can really see what's going on, and you begin to pull it back, it becomes an inner muse. For example, a woman may dream that her husband is going off every night and she's afraid he's having an affair. She can even maybe see the woman in her dreams. Very often he is going to his music studio or someplace where he can write, where he can actually work with his own inner bride. This is very confusing in a relationship. In fact, some of you may say, well, what's the point of all of this? Why bother making a relationship with this inner feminine if it's going to upset the outer marriage? It won't upset it if you stay with it. If you are projecting goddess onto someone, that divinity is your hope and your goal. But it's totally an illusion. No human being is a goddess. And the dark side will come out of that projection and turn against the person who is projecting. So to bring that energy in, recognize it as internal, is to bring out your own creativity. You write with that energy, you go into life with that energy, you create music, art, whatever whatever it is that brings you into your full maturity. More than that, in the marriage, the expectation is taken off. You no longer expect her to be who you want her to be, the goddess that you think she is. You begin to see her as she in fact is. And there's great beauty in human love. The anima really is the archetype of life. She is the principle of feeling and love in the relationship, by which I mean a presence that can look at the man and love him for who he is, for what he values. It's not what she is projecting onto him, but she loves what is coming forth in him and can put a love around that relationship that brings out the very strength of all his creative masculinity. And now we come to the shadow in women, the same sex as the ego. We are all of us, men and women, but women in particular have to look at it, if we're going to look at shadow, that we are the children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren of women raised in patriarchy. So we are carrying the shadow of patriarchy in our dreams. The terror of displeasing daddy, or daddy's surrogate, undermines the ego standpoint. As Dr. von Franz says, we cannot see our own shadow. She actually calls it our own backside. And if the ego could see those unconscious signals that we are putting out, it would find them contemptible. This film is about the anguish of coming to grips with that shadow.
Many women today are fighting to escape the bondage of the patriarchy, under which their identity and feelings of self-esteem rest mainly on their capacity to make themselves desirable. They're realizing that the greater potential of life within them is being smothered by this shadow of desire. These dreams show that there is an unlived side of the personality which can be integrated, a creative resource which can give a life a new meaning.
Well, I dreamt that a woman was trying to see herself in a mirror. And she said, "My husband has taken it away, so he doesn't have to look at me." And her friend, who was a woman, said, "My husband's done the same thing, and I could kill him." And the next thing was the sea, and the figure of a woman floundering in it. And a voice said, a male voice said, she always used to like to swim naked like this, early in her career. And it was Marilyn Monroe, luminous and white, with her yellow hair all spread out on the waves, very much like the calendar shot, where her yellow hair is out on the red velvet. The only problem was she didn't have any legs or any arms. There was just this trunk, luminous and white and sad looking, floundering in the water. And as I watched her, she became aware and turned, twisting her whole body, or her whole torso, what there was of it, towards me. And I caught the expression on her mouth, which was all painted in red, but so sad. And I said, "She always turns when she knows she is being watched, hoping to catch desire in the eyes of sailors."
First, there is this strange disappearance of the mirror twice, and one would think if the mirror is taken away, the woman cannot look at herself again, but the dream says the husband takes the mirror away so that he needs not to look at her, which is a complete dream absurdity. So we have to first ask ourselves, what is the mirror? In the mirror, the mirror reflects our image, and if you think of the double meaning of the word reflection, it also means to reflect upon oneself. To reflect means to bend back upon oneself, to find one's own identity. And the mirror shows one's objective, true face. Therefore, it's very often a shock to look at oneself in a mirror. And if you think of the mirror in the fairy tale Snow White, the mirror tells the truth to the old witch and says that Snow White is more beautiful than she is, and the witch gets furious at that. So the mirror is also what shows the truth, the reflection which shows the true identity. Now, both these women at the beginning of the dream accuse their husband to have taken away their possibility of seeing their own identity. You can say that is what the women's lib people all say. It's always the husbands, they have not their own identity, they feel raped, or they feel that their own feminine identity has been stolen to them, and the cheapest way is to accuse the husband. Now, the husband might have contributed to that, because men naturally carry in themselves all sorts of aesthetical and romantic ideas of how an ideal woman should be. Generally, this image they carry within themselves is influenced by their mother. They expect their wife to be, if they love their mother, their wife should be as similar to their mother as possible. If they hated their mother, their wife should be as different from their mother as possible. And that women having a natural tendency to comply to the wishes of their surrounding, to relate personally, women very often feel forced to play a role towards their husband, to fulfill his expectations instead of being themselves. And then they naturally feel bitter, as if the husband had stolen their possibility of being themselves. But in general, it is a projection. It is really that their own ambition or their own animus, that means their masculine drive, their wish for career and ambition, has estranged them from their feminine identity. Social life in general, and not the husband. And but the plain result in the dream is a feeling of despair, of having lost the mirror, the possibility of seeing oneself how one really is.
Well, my association with that immediately, there were two plays. One, Streetcar Named Desire, in which Blanche seeks her identity in the kindness of strangers. And I saw the eye of the sailor as being that kind of mirror, the same kind of mirror that the kindness of strangers was. And the other was Jean-Paul Sartre's No Exit, in which three people in hell, one woman, the nymphomaniac, does not exist because there are no mirrors in hell unless one of the other two characters looks at her, because there's so little self-identity. And it seemed that when I had this dream, it seemed to me that it mirrored it was a collective dream that mirrored something very wrong with women in our time, some terrible problem of women whose lack of self-identity makes them look for mirrors in the eyes of strangers or lovers instead of thinking of loving themselves. And the fact that she had no arms, she was incapable of love. And I thought of Marilyn.
She has been able to play to millions of men the ideal feminine figure, and playing that, and she has trained, or was trained by her own mother to play that role from very young on. And so she had the whole tragic fate of an actress who is disidentified from herself and plays a star role and loses the feeling of who she is in her private life. She had an obsessive fantasy in her youth that she was entering a cathedral and the whole congregation was there looking towards the altar, and when she came in, the whole congregation turned around and stared at her. That means nothing less that now she is the goddess. Nobody looks at the altar, the place of where God appears or becomes real or incarnates in the human world. She is the goddess. And this being identified with the goddess is naturally extremely dangerous. That is what we talked about inflation before. And so Marilyn Monroe in reality lost her identity, and that woman in her has died, and the only good thing to do would to give her a decent funeral. But we can also see it from another aspect, because Marilyn Monroe represented for most of the public, as her own fantasy shows, a feminine goddess. And it is because in the Christian churches the feminine goddess is lacking, that certain women or film stars are elevated to divine rank and admired so much. Greta Garbo had the same tragic difficulties, that she was too much deified, and she got frightened by it and ran away from it finally. She had enough. So it is also a problem of our civilization, because we have no official goddess to worship. Certain actresses or beautiful women are worshipped like a goddess instead, and they can't carry that projection. They don't know how to carry that projection. And so you can also say this drowned Marilyn Monroe figure in the dream is the divine woman within the dreamer, which should have developed as a kind of inner divine nucleus of the personality, her star, so to speak, her inner star, which she has lost by making an ordinary worldly career. In that case, Marilyn Monroe should not be buried, but rescued and brought back to life again. Both interpretations seem to contradict each other, but they don't. They are two halves of the same coin. One can see it in both ways. The dream is just ambiguous. He shows that's how it is. Look at it. And what she does with it and how she reacts towards it is still open.
And the fact that Marilyn Monroe has no arms or legs?
The arms are generally the organs of actions, and the legs are the organs with which we stand in reality, so that divine feminine image cannot act and cannot be anchored in reality. It is completely mutilated.
Of course, although I realized that I might participate in this also, I didn't see it as a specifically personal dream until a year later. I suddenly realized that for 50 years I hadn't used my hands. Therefore I cut off my arms. That's pretty much what I saw in the dream. And I set up my studio and started to work. Well, that's Pygmalion. And that's a Pygmalion daddy who has a very clear idea of what he wants his little girl to be, and he's making her in his own image. She's a little clay pot that's turning into a little clay cat who looks just like Daddy, but she doesn't really, if you look at her face, she doesn't really want to be what he wants her to be. And he's saying, be what I want you to be, damn it. So she probably will grow up to be thinking all the time what Daddy is thinking about what I'm doing, and be dissatisfied with herself if she doesn't live up to his standard. And I think that's women's great problem.
This dream occurred almost 3 years after the Marilyn Monroe dream. It's a long dream in 2 parts.
Well, I dreamt I came home to my dark living room, and in the middle of the room was a strange, dark-haired, foreign young woman whom I'd never seen before in my life. And I said, "What are you doing here?" And she said that she, in broken English, that she had come to look after my things while I was away to see nothing was stolen. And I said, "I don't believe you. How dare you intrude into my private place?" And I struck her, first on one cheek and then on the other. And after that I was surprised at my violence. And she ran away in tears.
When we look at this dream, we have to first look at the geography of the place. There is a living room sunk in the floor, low down, and then the bedrooms above. The bedrooms have all the quality of private life, private territory, where she doesn't want to have any intruders. Downstairs on the level floor, or even a bit on a lower level, the dream puts it on a low level, there is her social life. Now, this woman has made a great career, a professional career, and has living a lively social life, and the dream puts that down. That is, so to speak, the ground floor. But the important thing is higher up. There is a problem higher up, so to speak, which would have more priority. The problem is in the bedroom. When she comes up to the bedroom first, she finds this dark-haired unknown intruder, who at the end of the dream is the mother of the violated child. And she's just furious for having somebody unknown intruding into her private life, and slaps the intruder. We don't know who that dark-haired woman is. We can therefore only conclude it is a part of her personality whom she has no idea of, another part of herself whom she doesn't know, and whom she feels strange, and whom she wants to reject within herself, because she's unaccustomed to it. Very often during life we are suddenly assaulted by a new part of our personality, so to speak. We have new kind of feelings or reactions which we never had before, and very often out of sheer habit we hate that. We don't like to change. what's that? Why am I suddenly feeling so differently? And then we feel it's uncanny, and anything uncanny we try to slap down within us, instead of being open and saying, what new feelings or reactions do I have? Let's look at them. But she has this rejection. And then she, in the next part, discovers that this unknown woman she has slapped is a waitress in the downstairs room. So that gives us a little clue who that woman is. That is a part of her femininity who has up till now only concentrated on serving other people instead of looking after herself.
And it scene changed to a kind of basement cafeteria under apparently the apartment building I lived in. And there was a lot of confusion, and the manager was instructing the waitresses how to run things. And I noticed that the dark young woman was one of the waitresses. And I looked at the manager, and he had on beige clothes, but I couldn't make out his face. It was all out of focus, like a test site I'd had that morning. I couldn't see the card, and everything was blurred. And it reminded me of that, even in the dream. And then I overheard a conversation in which it became quite clear that the manager had sent this young woman to my apartment. And I began to feel rather badly that I had dismissed her so summarily. Right. Then I go to sleep. Now I'm in my narrow bed in a room of my own, very narrow, very like the room of someone who's left a marriage, that kind of room. And suddenly I wake, and sitting beside the bed in a little tiny chair is a little tiny boy of about 2 years old with pink and white skin. He looks like a little rose petal. He's so exquisite. I lean down to look at him. He's got a little bag of pink and white candies, just the same color he is. And I think he's a sweet baby. He's not disturbing me. He can stay there. So I go on with whatever it was I was doing, and then I turn to look at him again, and he's turned into an older child, a girl, dark instead of blonde, naked, who's eating something with bloody hands. And I notice that her vagina seems to be split open and filled with blood. And I think, oh, how horrible. She's mutilated herself, or has she been violated? And I feel just overwhelming sorrow. And then I realize that she is the child of the dark woman intruder.
Then she comes again back to the upstairs bedroom, and the bedroom is very bare and is a cramped hotel room, quite in contrast to her actual bedroom, which is comfortable and wide with armchairs and bookshelves. So it represents her private life, her intimate life, and the dream tells her, look here, there is not enough space, and we know now that space and time are the same thing, therefore I would say there's not enough space-time for your private life. This is a woman who probably lives much too extrovertedly her professional life and her social life, and she doesn't take enough room and space and time to be with herself. And so that her psychological bedroom is a cramped hotel room. And the hotel room is also something where strangers live and where strangers can walk in and out. She has no real privacy. She has not a realm of introversion where she can be herself, where she can have her personal secrets. It's all spent away to other people. And part of her femininity, which should look after an inner child, is acting as a waitress to other people. That is like Marilyn Monroe in the other dream being an actress, acting for other people. And here, this one is waiting for other people, serving other people, instead of looking after one's own business. This dark-haired woman should have looked after her little daughter so that she shouldn't be raped, instead of waiting on downstairs. And so the woman discovers with horror who she is, and then she finds in this cramped bedroom a beautiful little boy who is delicate and smiling and absolutely charming, divine little figure. Now, a boy in a woman's dream generally means a new enterprise, and therefore, because boys, if you look at them, young boys are the epitome of doing something all the time in an honest. Jung always said a boy that is the honest enterprise. And that honest enterprise we must therefore probably put together with the fact that she has begun painting. That was her first undertaking where she did something for her own psyche, for her own self, and where there was an honest enterprise which was not looking for success or anything, but doing a thing for its own sake. And that's the little boy, and there something comes into being, a new aspect of her personality comes into being. But that painting is only instrumental, because the little boy then changes into a little girl, and that means this painting she's now doing is not a purpose in it, has no purpose in its own. It is instrumental to bring forth a new part of her feminine personality, of bringing out her femininity, and that is the little girl, her true femininity. That little daughter of the dark-haired woman would be her true feminine identity, which is still very young and growing. Is not. She begins only to have a hunch of that true new identity, and that's why it's still a little girl. And there she discovers with horror that that little girl is bleeding in the vagina and is probably having been raped and violated and ill-treated.
Who raped the little girl?
We must probably say she herself, or her animus, her masculine side, her career-mindedness. By her career-mindedness, behind her own back, she raped her true femininity, which wanted to grow within her. But the girl is not dead. The problem can be mended in the dream. The dream only in a very dramatic form wants to show her, if you go on with your social life and your career-mindedness, you rape something within yourself, which is just born and wants to grow within you, a new kind of woman.
Well, obviously, there is some tie-in with my Marilyn Monroe dream and the mutilation. And that morning I had had a test and was feeling very sorry for myself because I'd had a second operation for detaching retinas, and I hadn't been able to focus, and I'd given up working in the studio and been very morose. And 6 days after this dream, I went in and set up my sculpture studio. So I think that the dream was telling me that I'd been mutilating myself in my self-pity.
Dr. von Franz, is there a relationship between this dream and her Marilyn Monroe dream?
We see in the first dream of Marilyn Monroe that something is dying or has died within this woman, and in the second dream something has been born. We could even make the assumption that the raped little girl is the reborn Marilyn Monroe in that wrong form of acting and hunting success. This figure has to die, and in its new form of new life, of a new growing personality, it comes back again. There is constantly in dreams, we have deaths and births of parts of our personality. We die during life, parts of our personality die, rightly or sometimes wrongly within us, and others are born.
This is the monster baby, the little girl that never grew up. In fact, it's probably the little pussycat. She's smoking Pop's pride. She's a ventriloquist dummy. The ventriloquist is Daddy, and her jaw is chained to his with a little golden chain, which is the death rattle in her hand. She's in a cage. She's in her own little theater. She's a little star. She can't get out of the limelight. She has stars on her shoes and stars on her hat, which is Daddy's hat, of course, the fedora. She wants to shine for Daddy, and her whole life is committed to it. and simply spouts Daddy's opinions and lives by his rules and thinks she's happy, or she's in a prison. She's a prisoner of it. She's what happens when a woman has no inner identity.
The development of masculinity can be very important in a woman's life. It's her capacity to act on her own behalf, and without it, she can feel trapped and paralyzed. In these 3 dreams, which occurred over a period of 4 years, we see the struggle involved in the development of creative masculinity. This woman left her marriage and established herself in a new lifestyle. In the first dream, there's no masculine figure, just a mother's shadow.
In this dream, there's an enormous king-size mattress. I mean huge. It seems to be suspended. There's nothing else around it. No sheets, nothing. I'm on it, laying this way. Over to my right, I feel that there's something there. I look over, it's a woman walking along at a distance with 2 Dobermans on leashes, black Dobermans. As she comes towards me, I keep watching her. She comes closer and closer. When she gets to about 3 feet beside me, she looks down at me. I have this feeling of really being aware of her looking down at me with disgust. She has a babushka around her head, tied. She looks at me, lets go of the leashes, and the 2 black dogs just zap right at my throat.
The whole problem is already told in the first sentence of the dream, where the dreamer says, I was lying on a mattress floating in the air. The dreamer is shown that she has no relationship to the earth. She has not her feet on the earth. She has no contact with reality. And that means she has also no real contact with her own body. And she's living in ideas, in theoretical conceptions of life, in illusions. And then a woman comes towards her with those Doberman pinchers, and those would be the earthly forces, the instinctual force. The dog represents our domesticated instincts, but they are hostile. They are associated to the Nazis using them. So because she's floating in the air, the instinct turns against her, is resentful against her, because she doesn't attend her own animal instincts. And the woman has a babushka on her head, which reminds her of her mother.
Well, I'm Polish, and that's a very common Polish sort of tradition. Babushkas are very it's everybody wears a babushka, either on the head or around the shoulders. My mother wore one.
Now the mother for a woman represents the instinctual basis, the matrix, also the whole area of the uterus. If a woman has trouble with her mother, she has very often trouble with menstruation and with her own sexual functions and her maternal feelings. The mother is, so to speak, the earth from which she lives. And that mother figure lets the Dobermans loose on her a fierce, hostile, negative aspect, attack of the instincts. So the dream says, because you are floating in midair, because you have lost touch with reality, the instinctual basis of your femininity has become hostile to you and is threatening you, which goes very well with the fact that she became afterwards ill. Because if one lives against one's own animal instincts, then illness is in the offing.
After the 2 dreams, shortly after the 2 dreams, as a matter of fact, within 6 weeks of the second time I had the dream, I ended up in the hospital with a very serious infection, pelvic infection.
The dogs attack the throat. Is there significance to that?
Well, I think, first of all, when a dog wants to really kill, he attacks the throat, he bites the artery on the throat. That is the killing movement. So it shows that the dogs mean real business. that they are really not only playfully attacking, but it makes the attack really dangerous. We can also look at the symbolism of the throat, and the throat is, for instance, in the Hinduistic teaching of the chakra centrum, is the center of the word, of the logos, of the spoken word. She believes in the world of words. She doesn't believe, she doesn't listen to what the instinct speaks out of one's stomach or from deeper centers. But that goes together with her floating in the air. She probably mirrors herself in her own reflections as a successful woman, and that is living in the world of ideas and words. And that is the so-called Vishuddha center in the Hinduistic chakra teaching, and that's what is attacked.
Is it possible to actually diagnose a disease from a dream?
After the event, one can say so, but I wouldn't have dared to say so ahead of time. I would have only said you are living against your own instincts, and that will very likely end up in some kind of disease. Because it's obvious, if you eat too much or too little, or if you sleep too much or too little, if you do anything against your instinct, you are likely to catch a disease.
The next dream, she dreamt 3 years later, after she left her marriage. It's interesting that the shadow figure of the mother changes from the extremely negative figure to a positive figure that brings her down to the ground.
In this dream, I'm in a room. There's my mother and a male with me. Okay, it's a very tiny room. There's hardly any furniture in it except one bed on one side. There's not too much going on, and we're just kind of standing there. Then I get this feeling that there's a body outside the door. I walk over to it, open the door, and sure enough, there's a body. It's like a central hallway with doors going in. I look down on the ground, there is a body there. You can't see the body. It's wrapped in a sheet, but I know that it's a male. I shut the door, and now we have to leave. The three of us have to go. So we go to the back door, open it, and to get down, it's an incredibly steep staircase, wooden, and just an unbelievable sort of drop. The stairs are open, they're not closed in. It's really dangerous. My mother goes first, me and the male go behind her. She starts walking down, she takes a couple of steps, and I'm being very, very cautious. And then all of a sudden she does this beautiful leap from way up high, lands flat on the ground, both feet, excellent jump. I'm just in awe. It's just wow. Then everything changes. I'm by myself. I'm walking through like a village, a small town. It's quite barren, there's a lot of sand. As I approach the center of the square, there's a platform which is about 3 or 4 steps up. There's stairs leading to it. It's a hanging man's platform, an absolute square, made out of wood, an old, weathered kind of wood. There's 4 pillars around the corners, and then in the center there's the hanging man's pole. I approach it, look at it, and there's a man hanging there. I look again. He's hanging, but by his feet. I'm not alarmed at it or anything. I look at it, and then I walk by.
Though the animus is often spoken of as a nuisance in the woman, he has also very positive and important functions, because a woman whose animus is lamed or is not functioning is too passive and therefore too exposed to the vicissitudes of life. She cannot take her own destiny into her own hands, and therefore the animus really is a very positive figure. This dream here shows that the woman is with her mother, and actually she was very much wrapped up in her mother, and therefore dominantly feminine, and had not developed her own masculinity. And this own masculinity is shown in the dream as wrapped up in linen, dead, lying before the door. That is the part of her personality which has died and should be resuscitated. She therefore has to leave the place where she is. She has to change her life situation. And the path is leading downwards, a rather dangerous step. She has to come on a deeper down level of reality, become more realistic, realizing her practical life situation. And she succeeds in doing so, and then she comes to a village, an old village, old-fashioned village, which probably mirrors the old-fashioned way of life, where women were not allowed to have any initiative of their own, where they had this kind of passive, submissive life of the past. And there she finds that in the center square of the village a man is hung up. In that atmosphere of old-fashioned femininity, all the positive masculine forces in woman are suspended, literally suspended. They are killed. They cannot act, and therefore the dream shows what is wrong with her. She probably, being in a very difficult outer situation, would be inclined to think that all her bad luck lies in the outer situation and in her negative marital situation. And the dream shows her that the real trouble is that her own masculinity is dead, is not functioning, and has to be rescued and revived again.
Would you amplify the image of the hanging man?
Hanging is, in general, a kind of negative deification. After all, the god of Western civilization is a hanged man. And it means the moment of being elevated into the spiritual realm and be recognized as a god, but at the expense of human reality. One is, so to speak, hung up in eternity, and the human reality is dead. And that's why, for instance, the old Germans hung up their prisoners in honor of Wotan. And when the wind was blowing them back and forth on the gallows or the trees where they hung them, that meant that Wotan, the god, the spiritual god, was taking them to them. But it also means what the English word says, to be in a suspended state. Suspended means hanging. So it means that all her masculine intelligence and capacity of action and courage and all her masculine qualities are existing but suspended, in suspense, and not touching the reality. They are turned upside down, where the man should have his head up, which means she should have her head up herself and think her situation over and take it in hand like a man, and all that is suspended and condemned to inaction through an old-fashioned attitude towards life on one side and through a too great identity with her mother on the other side.
The next dream occurred after she was rejected by a lover. She had told him that she had strong feelings of love and affection toward him, and he said the feelings were not reciprocated, that he saw her just as a sex object. The dream begins, she's sitting in the balcony of a movie theater.
All of a sudden I have to go to the washroom. I'm looking for a washroom. I get up, I walk towards the back of the theater. There's an usherette standing there. We go to the washroom together. It's kind of a strange wooden door. It's a storage area washroom somehow. We both sort of go in, or she opens the door and kind of holds it for me, and I enter it. Now, to go in there and pee, I realize you can't shut the door. As I'm thinking that, a man enters in a suit, and I'm outraged because this is a ladies' washroom, so I tell him to get out. Then I see another man coming towards me. Now this is quite short, stockily built, okay? He's coming towards me. I'm outraged at the fact that these men are in the ladies' washroom. He comes right towards me. The stocky man comes right towards me. I look over at the other man, and he says he's a Taekwondo master. And I look over at the stocky man, and he has assumed the stance of, you know, the martial arts sort of thing. And then in a leap, he's at my throat.
She has been terribly hit before this dream by the negative answer of that partner. Now, the dream changes that hit or represents that shocking hit, but in a different form. First, he shows that it happened when she wanted to pee in a toilet. Now, to pee generally has a symbolism of expressing oneself genuinely. Peeing is one of the few functions man cannot repress. We can repress sleep for a while, we can repress eating for a while, but peeing is just above us. It rules us. And therefore it is an expression of, here I am, that's how I am. It always means to be genuine. And the dream says, look here, for once you have tried to be genuine when you asked this man, do you love me? And inferred at the same time that you love him. That was your true feeling. And you got hit, but you did not get hit really by him, the partner who told you he's not interested in you. You got hit by somebody else. You got hit by this karate hero, by that horrible man who hits with a karate gesture your throat. Now this karate man is within her, as if the dream says you did not get the shock from outside, you got it from your own nature, which reminds one of the fact that Jung once said, there is no difficulty which we ultimately are not to ourselves. We are our own difficulty. And her love difficulty is within herself. She has such a karate fellow in her. And she can only therefore develop further or become herself if she realizes that the terrible shock she fetched herself in the outer world is something, a problem in her own nature, and that she has to face up to the fact that she has such a hard fighting man in herself who devaluates her as a woman.
Now this figure, this karate figure who attacks women when they become genuine with their feelings, will you talk about him in terms of society in general?
Well, I would say it is the modern style in the Western societies, and beginning also now in China and in the Marxist societies, is to organize the masses with computers and to discourage every personal feeling. In the West, for instance, it's a rule in big business to rotate men around in different places just to prevent too much personal attachment. Personal attachment is looked at to be forming a clique. Personal feeling is discouraged. You see it also in political debates nowadays. One of the most negative things one can say about an opponent is to say he uses only feeling arguments. He's not logical, as if logic were the only way to argument. One can also argument with the heart. One can also protest with one's feelings, not only with economic logic. But nowadays the fashion, the absolute fashion is to be rational. And many schools of modern psychology are also rational. If something is wrong in the marriage, one has to rationally reorganize sex life, have extramarital affairs, or use practical new positions, Kama Sutram positions, or fix up the thing rationally as if it were a broken down car. And treating man like a broken down car. And that is absolutely destructive to feeling. And it hits men and women equally, but women even more, because women in generally put more emphasis on personal relationship and personal feelings, and therefore they are hit first. And that's why women are nowadays so unhappy and in a general revolt against many things. They feel that they are thwarted of their life. Naturally, it hits men too, because if women go crazy and become disagreeable and cold, it reverberates on the sons and on the partners and on the men as well. But a man can stand a rationally organized world rather a bit longer than a woman. He's not happy in it finally himself either, but he can stand it longer.
There are many movements today to get back into the body. Tai Chi, jogging, fitness programs.
This tremendous emphasis on the body nowadays in psychotherapy is a compensatory movement. My feeling is, from my own experience, that that those exercises to get back in the body, Tai Chi and all sorts of group experience and so on, is a bit too technical again. It's too intentional. I think that going into nature and living with nature is a better way of sinking back into the body, a more natural way. But not everybody can do that, and those exercises are certainly sometimes very helpful.
What happens when the individual connects the head and the body?
Well, generally when people sink into their body, they are first, the bridge between the head and the body are the emotions, probably connected in the brain with the limbic system, the affects and the emotions. And generally when people try to, through exercises, get into their bodies, they first touch on certain emotions. A wild resentment against father or mother or something like that. Generally negative emotions which have been repressed. And the first step is to let those out, to let those come up, not to suppress them with the head. And then generally there is an outburst and tears and sweat and physical reaction, and then a relaxation, and then a better connection with the body.
You've been describing a society where the head, the thinking, is over here, and the body, the instincts and the emotions are here, and the problem involved in putting the head on top. What's wrong with our society?
What is wrong is that the whole collective consciousness doesn't evaluate eros anymore, and eros is personal. It is from one being to another being in a unique and personal way, and that is not evaluated. That is not, that doesn't count for anything. You cannot say, I do that because I love so-and-so, I do that against the rules because I love so-and-so. The rules are the rules. The computer has spilled them out that way, and that's the way it has to be. The whole depersonalization and the whole mass organization of modern society is destructive to feeling, and that drives women mad.
The father complex can raise hell in the unconscious of a woman. His authority is absolute, and he blocks her from contacting her own creative spirit. Here's a dream that shows the animus in a highly negative form, chastising the dreamer and driving her into a state of bitter isolation. She tells the dream in two parts.
I'm sitting in a cabin, a remotely placed cabin, and I'm sitting on the floor. I'm brushing the hair of a cat. I can't see the cat, but I know it's got orange fur because I'm pulling the fur of the cat out of the brush. A woman behind me is using the phone, and I'm sitting beside a man I don't recognize, but I know in the dream is my father. He's very tall and strongly built with short hair. He is chief of police, and we live in the police department of a remote settlement. The woman finishes using the phone and hangs it up and leaves, and he walks over to where she has been and tidies up something and turns and walks towards me and says, "They're crazy, they're just plain crazy." She's been making incestuous overtures to whoever she's been talking to on the phone.
In the beginning of the dream, she's brushing an orange cat. The cat stems in our countries originally from Egypt, and there it was a divine animal, and there was a cat goddess Bastet, who was the goddess of music, sexuality, pleasure in life, and altogether fertility and life-embracing feminine fertility. The cat also, in contrast to dogs, has never sold its soul to man. The cat has always a kind of egocentric reserve somewhere. The cat says to us, "You may stroke me and you may serve me, but it never becomes your slave. And if you annoy it, it just walks out on you." And therefore the cat stands very often in women's dream as an image of something feminine, being independent and sure of itself, just what modern women are so often lacking. And that's why the cat goddess comes very often up in them as a positive model of feminine behavior. Because the cat is not brutal and displays no masculine features. It is very feminine, and all the same it's very firm and very identical with itself and very true to itself. The cat is not very amiable, but very true to itself. And so the beginning of the dream tells us that she's trying to approach and to look after her own femininity. And at that moment, the father walks up, and it's not her real father, but it is in the dream called her father, and it's a chief of police. And that shows that the image of the real father has become within her a chief of police. That would be that she now this woman tyrannizes herself with rules of behavior. In actual life, she has decided to become a good mother, and she forces herself in a tyrannical, harsh, authoritarian way to be a good mother. Her home, her children, and she and the family life has to be the way she thinks is right. But that's why the dream says it's the chief of police. The police is mainly engaged to look in a very collective, undifferentiated way that things go on orderly, conventionally orderly. And so the chief of police is that animus in woman who wants authority, order, behaving like everybody else, not doing anything shocking to everybody. A bit the opposite of the cat. The chief of police and the cat never get on very well, and that poor woman has both in her at the same time. And then the chief of police declares the woman to be crazy. So that would be a secret voice in her that whenever she follows her own feeling, something says, "No, that's crazy, don't do that. You are crazy if you do that." Many people repress things within themselves by calling them crazy.
In the second part of the dream, tremendous anger suddenly springs up.
I'm standing beside my father. He has found a note that I've written to a boyfriend, and he is in a murderous rage. The kid is standing in front of him. I start to tremble violently and run from the room through a door that is usually locked by a hook high up on the door. I see that it isn't locked, and I run through into the bathroom. There's a man sitting on the floor in there who doesn't pay any attention to me. I'm wearing a parka and a hat, and I vomit into the toilet. As I'm doing this, I can see that my father is going to tie my hands together and hang me from the rafters in the cabin and beat me with a stick. I wake up from the dream shouting, "Harry, Harry!"
There again we have the image, naturally, there exist in reality fathers who think they have to anxiously protect the integrity of their daughters and therefore pursue them when they write notes to their first boyfriend and so on. But here this is no longer the case, as this woman is married and away from home. So she is doing that again to herself. And that is the greatest tragedy about the negative animus, that it always flares up with its power where a woman loves. Whenever a woman loves somebody, or a man or somebody, the animus comes and wants to cut it off. The negative animus tries to cut off women from any kind of relationship by belittling the relationship or calling it crazy or by some other means. The negative animus mainly manifests as a opinionated resistance against having feelings of love. And that's why, especially if a woman has a tendency to fall in love or to be even only interested in a man, then her animus comes up and makes her ruin the relationship.
How does a woman experience that inside herself?
Subjectively, you don't know, you think you are under a curse. Just when you want to meet the man or talk to the man you love, something makes you make him a scene, a tearful scene. And then you go home and cry and you say, I wanted to have a good relationship to him and now... And then either you project and you say, and he is so nasty to me, or you are a bit more honest and then you say, and just because I want a relationship to him, I have made him a scene. And you just don't know what devil's mechanism makes you do that. But women always hit. If a woman hits you as a man, you can be sure she's interested in you. And she would really want to love you, but she doesn't know how to do it. The negative animus behaves here like a jealous lover. He wants to keep the woman and cut her off from all men. That is the typical mechanism when she has some loving feelings towards any man, then up comes this, you should not do that animus. Or it's projected. I know the classical case of a woman who once attacked Jung in the analytical hour worse than ever with the animus, and they went into what happened in the hour happened before. Jung had told her, whenever you have a feeling, that's when you attack. She had, on the way to Jung, seen beautiful strawberries, and her first impulse was, let's buy them and bring them to him. And then the animus said, oh, he will say strawberries have an erotic meaning and he'll mock at me. So she didn't buy the strawberries. And then she arrived in a fierce mood and attacked Jung all the hour. Just because she had suppressed the strawberries. Just because, if she had bought the strawberries, everything would have gone well, but she had repressed her own feeling.
You say that the animus says this to a woman. Subjectively, what does she experience? That a voice is actually talking inside her head? Or what?
No, the worst about it is she experiences it as if she thinks it herself. It thinks in her, Jung is going to laugh at the strawberries. And she feels she thinks that. And therefore that is one of the long troubles of analytical work, to make women distinguish between what they really think themselves and what it thinks in them, which they think is their own thoughts. And even when you have worked for years on that, I have sometimes negative thoughts against myself, which I would, if you asked me at the moment, say, yes, that's what I think about myself. And then I have a dream of a man raping me, and then I know, no, that was an evil animus in me who thought that.
What's the origin of that voice? Does it have its roots in the relationship with the father?
The first man a woman meets is the father, and the father has therefore a very decisive influence on a young girl. If the relationship to the father constellates itself negatively, the girl reacts negatively towards the father. The father might not be an evil man in himself, but the girl might not like him, or the father might be a difficult person. Then there's generally later also difficulties with men, and difficulties to find her own masculine side. In other words, the animus, her own masculinity, is a problem to her. And such a woman also tends to behave towards herself as her father did to her. If the father was tyrannical, later, even if the father has died, the woman tyrannizes herself with ideas and opinions which still come from the father image. And so the detachment from the father and the relationship to the father plays always a big role in the development of a woman.
Can the negative animus interfere in the woman's relationship with her children in the same way?
The animus actually does interfere with the maternal feelings in certain women when they have not a strong maternal instinct. Then, for instance, the chief of police tells them that they should not get angry. Let's say a child misbehaves and whines and spills the soup over the plate, and then it is a natural reaction to get angry and to shout a bit. If it doesn't go too far, it's quite normal for a child to accept that. But then the chief of police says, no, that's not good education, the child will have a trauma. And then she swallows it and gets angry and does something much worse to the child. That's why in this dream the woman goes to the toilet and vomits. She obviously swallows too much, which she can't swallow, which she should not swallow. You vomit if you have eaten something you shouldn't eat, and which your stomach refuses. She stomachs too much. So I would have the guess that very often her children annoy her, and instead of howling on top of your voice, you are impossible brats, go to hell, she swallows everything. And children like strong reactions if they are carried by a loving undertone. If it I have known, I was once in an Italian inn where a mason's woman was cooking for the whole inn, and around her were about 12 little children, and she constantly howled at them and banged them in the head, and you saw, I've never seen as blossoming children, because it was all carried on in a warm atmosphere of maternal love.
Can you give us an example of a well-known negative animus figure?
Well, the classical example of the destructive animus whom the woman has at all costs to escape is the famous fairy tale of Bluebeard, where she gets into the hands of into a castle where the owner, she discovers, secretly has cut up and slaughtered all his former wives. And when she discovers this terrible secret, she can only just with the help of her brothers escape again. So that is the classical image of the destructive animus. If a woman cannot escape these self-destructive, self-annihilating thoughts, it might even lead to a severe psychological disturbance, or at least such women who can't escape their Bluebeard become generally isolated, bitter women who have no men loving them and find no partner and live in bitter isolation, if not worse situation.
These women are stripped of their capacity for human love and affection.
It has to do with the animus, namely with that they allow self-destructive opinion, impulses, actions to rape their psychological personality. They rape, so to speak, themselves with the animus. I have, for instance, often when I have indulged in destructive thoughts about myself or about my work, dreamt of being pursued by hostile men. The dream saying those negative thoughts are not you, they are hostile anima in you, and you should run away from these kind of thoughts. They destroy you if you stay with it.
Could you be more specific?
Well, for instance, just take the woman who is annoyed with her little boy spilling the whole soup. Her natural feeling would be saying, damn it, now you have again spilled the soup. And then the pedagogic animus says in her, you mustn't speak loud to your little boy, that's pedagogically not wise. Then she rapes her feeling. With her opinion that she shouldn't speak up, she rapes her natural feeling. She rapes her feminine reaction by having an opinion that she shouldn't have a feminine natural reaction.
Can a woman's dream of rape be positive?
I would say that depends on who rapes her. If she might dream that a powerful, healthy, or in any other way positive figure rapes her, then I would still not like it because it's such a passive situation. But you could say then she's overwhelmed by something positive. But altogether, rape, if you use the word rape, I would always say that is a bit too, she's then too passive. She hasn't said yes to it, and so it isn't quite good. It's kind of a psychological happening instead of a accepted situation. So even if the raping partner is positive, it is not quite it.
We were talking earlier about how men become paralyzed by women's tears, the crocodile tears when they get hurt. And you use the image of the animus of the woman becoming this great hulk of a man, and then picking the girl up, picking the woman up as a little girl, and holding the little girl in front of him. So the animus then can come from behind and smash the man, but shielded by the little girl, which the man hits if he tries to strike back at the attack coming at him from the animus. Can you talk about that image?
Well, that is only a simile, because women like to do that double play to a man when they are in the animus. They brutally attack the man, or they viciously, with their tongue, attack the man. And when the man hits back, they say they are such a delicate, frightened little child, and now the brutal man is attacking them again, though they have attacked first. And so I always call that the woman having a gangster animus who uses the woman like a little girl and puts it in front, and one can't shoot down the gangster because he puts the touchy little girl in front of him so that one cannot shoot at him. And that's what women, they play at the same time. The touchy little girl who the man may not say woo to them because they are so uncertain of themselves, and the tyrannical man makes them even more uncertain, and the man doesn't listen to them, and so on. And at the same time, they themselves viciously attack by making chiding remarks or aggressive remarks to the man.
But say the man is moved by the woman's tears. What's he supposed to do? Smash her?
Generally, men feel very awkward when women cry, and they feel, and the women cry to make men feel guilty. And so men feel guilty, they feel they are a brute who has made they have made the woman cry, and so they feel uncomfortable and awkward, and they generally react in some inappropriate way because they feel cornered.
When Jung describes a woman locked in the animus, he says that she's possessed. She's animus possessed. That word is usually connected to religion, to witchcraft, or to primitive tribes.
There you have wonderful states of possession when, for instance, certain mediums go into trance and then they are possessed by a certain godhead. You have that, for instance, in Hawaii. certain people go into trance, and then certain godheads, female or male, enter them, and then they speak in a changed voice, and the god speaks through them. Then they are possessed by a god. They call that they become the horse, and the god becomes their rider. And I have a book on Hawaiian states of possession, and there is a photograph of 3 different male mediums incorporating the same god, Legbe. And they make exactly the same movement. Though they are, as human beings, different, when they are possessed, they behave all in the same way. They are possessed, we would say, by an archetypal figure, by a collective figure. Now, in waking up, these mediums sometimes don't remember what they have said in the trance state. They have been entered by a spirit. Now, this is an extreme of something which is normal in every human being. The whole day long, our field of consciousness is entered by autonomous complexes. You can notice that if you watch your own trend of thoughts, then, for instance, you are in a friendly, loving mood, and then you suddenly think of something negative, and then hatred and bitterness enters the scene, and a quarter of an hour later you muse revenge about something which has been done to you, and then your inner scene changes again, and you think of something else, and you get again in. We constantly switch moods. And therefore, if we watch ourselves, we are many people. I could give you a whole list of what kind of persons I can be. I can be an old peasant woman who thinks of cooking and of the house. I am a scholar who thinks about deciphering manuscripts. I am a psychotherapist who thinks about how to interpret people's dreams. I am a mischievous little boy who enjoys the company of 10 years old and playing mischief to adults, and so on. I could give you 20 more such characters. And they suddenly enter you. And that's a kind, and if you know it, you can steer it. You can, for instance, keep them out of your system, or play them and put them aside again. But if you are possessed, it means they enter you involuntarily, and you act it out involuntarily. Now, for instance, the mischievous person I can call up and send back to sleep again when I feel now there's enough, I can't afford that yet, now. That's not possession. And so that is one of the aims of psychotherapy, to help people to get on with their inner family of souls without getting possessed by them, and to keep a constant identity of themselves. Now, the animus is the most frequent possession in a woman, that she's certainly entered by a mood of male determination, cold, generalizing thinking, opinions, or of an impulse towards rash, brutal, determined action, which is not at all in her feminine character, which changes her character. You even see in a woman, when she gets possessed by the animus, that her face expression changes, her eyes change, her mouth, expression of her mouth changes. I notice that when I get in the animus, I do this. I pull up my shoulders, like somebody who prepares for attacking battle. When I do that, then I know, oh, stop and relax.
I was once told that it didn't matter if I understood a dream. What was important was that the dream understood me. That my attitude toward the dream would determine its attitude toward me. It's a living dialogue. When we listen to dreams, we change. And when dreams are heard, they change. Here are 4 dreams of an air stewardess that demonstrate what happens when dreams are listened to.
Okay, I had this dream about flying, that I could fly. Sort of like Samantha in Bewitched, just straight through roofs, just disappear. And I was flying through the roofs, up into the clouds. Could also produce a gray mist. This would encircle me so that nobody could see me. I could still see through it, I could still see other people, but nobody could see me. And I went up to about cloud level and just sort of sat there, just weightless, and sat there and had tea with somebody else.
This dream is difficult to interpret because the outer situation of the dreamer is flying, so that the flying has a double connotation. It means what she actually is doing, and it also has a symbolic meaning, how she is psychologically behaving. But naturally one can also say it is not by chance that she has chosen that profession, so it in a deeper sense, naturally the meaning is one. And she's flying in mid-air, and she can even veil herself in a grey mist which she produces. And here I would rather take the slightly negative connotation of the flying, namely this weightless sipping tea on a cloud. All the connotation shows a very light and unrealistic attitude, a delightful but unrealistic attitude. There is no earth anywhere. Having a cup of tea is even an expression in English for saying light chatting, light social contact with people, nothing substantial. Tea doesn't nourish, it's a stimulating drink. On the grey mist, you see a stewardess has very much to play a role. She has to be the charming geisha waitress of the air, and nobody is interested in her private life and in her as a woman and a human being. Therefore, there's also a temptation to constantly have slight flirtations, but not very deep-going relationships, which are also very much disturbed by the time program of stewards and stewardesses. It's a very difficult life through the time program. And that's why an extreme comes where she is in prison.
I was in a jailhouse, one of the old-fashioned kinds from the Western movies, just the wooden building with the one main desk in it, and behind that you could see just the 2-3 jail cells. And the guards were talking about how there'd been a lot of jailbreaks recently. There was also 2 prisoners. One came out of his cell and went to take a shower, and he escaped. And the 2 guards were discussing this, and they said, well, it was very strange that there'd been 2 jailbreaks in one evening. And then they all turned around and looked at me, and they thought it was very suspicious, and then I woke up.
That prison I would take as the timetable in which she is imprisoned. It is a very difficult profession because let's say the stewardess, the dreamer meets a man she likes. Well, she can stay with him 2 hours at airport so-and-so, but she has to take the next airplane back evening so-and-so. She is constantly in prison, and except for short holidays, she cannot break free from that. And also suffering from the jet lag, there is generally a big physical discomfort in this profession. An irregularity of sleep and physical discomfort, which makes these people even more uprooted and not connected with their body and with their own depth. Even the dreaming business is difficult for a stewardess. She sleeps once a daytime, once early in the evening, once late in the night, and when has she time to record and think over her dreams? So it is a very difficult profession, and that's why also in aging, it's good for young people who like the spirit of adventure which is connected with it. But generally in aging, there's a strong wish comes up to retire from it. And therefore, and to break free from that prison and have a life where you can more give it a creative form, your own life, so to speak, your own private life, and form your own life.
The unlived part of this dreamer's life becomes obvious in the next dream. Her friend Sue raises mischief because she's neglected and bored. She dreamt that she lived with her friend Sue.
I had this dream about my friend Sue, and the two of us were sharing a 2-bedroom apartment. It was a large apartment, and she was out of work though. And quite often when I came home from work, I'd find the place disorderly and messy. And it really got on my nerves. And this one time I came off a flight, got home, and Sue was there, but she'd spilt some red wine all over this light gray carpet. And I was really annoyed because it stains and it's hard to get out. So we went down to Simpson's and spent a whole day looking for cleaning utensils. It was up to one floor and down to another one, and bought a sponge and some bleach, and finally went home to clean up this mess. Finally got that cleaned up and arguing about it and all, and my mother came up for a visit, and Sue left. And my mother and I were talking about the 2-bedroom apartment, and was it really worthwhile having this extra space for the hassle it was causing. So we talked about it, and I went downstairs to see her 1-bedroom, because she lived in the same apartment building, to see if maybe I shouldn't go back to living by myself in this 1-bedroom. So we were talking about that, and then my mother just fades out of the dream. I went back to work and came back from a flight, and I wanted to do my laundry. And for some reason didn't do it in the building, but I packed it all up and took it with me and went way up to this girlfriend's place that lived at Yonge and Willowdale. And got it up there, but her and her husband started arguing about the fact that this was kind of silly, like why was I there doing my laundry? And I really shouldn't have been there at all. Then they started having this party, and there was people dancing, and I was dancing with some, it was a woman, but she was weightless, and I had to keep holding on to her. So the laundry must have been finished because I left, and I went back to the apartment. But as I was walking towards the apartment, all the apartments were on this balcony, sort of, and you walked along this whole outside railing. And then you opened your own apartment, or went right into it. We were about 12 floors up, and hanging on the railing just outside my own apartment was my brother. And he'd been tied up, and he was unconscious, and he'd been tied up for quite a while. And it was a trick to untie him without letting him fall. So I went back into the apartment, got scissors and stuff, and started untying him really carefully. And while I did so, I pulled him off the railing and off the balcony and dragged him into my apartment, put blankets all over him, and knew he was going to be all right.
Cleaning and washing is mostly a woman's connection with the earth, with the body, with the material world. It's an expression of love towards matter, devotion to the principle of matter, and all that in her flying condition, psychologically and outwardly, she cannot do. If the dreamer could live the Susie side of her personality, there wouldn't be such a difficulty, but because she cannot live the side which likes to be doing the household, which quietly lives introvertedly daydreaming while washing up. Washing up is a marvelous creative recreation where one can hang on one's own fantasies and thought, or a woman can think over her dreams and such things. And all that she cannot do, and so Susie is cantankerous and makes mischief and all sorts of trouble, and in the end we'll see that she even hangs the brother of the dreamer. Then the dreamer goes to do laundry, but she doesn't do it in her own house. She goes to some friends further away in town and washes the dirty linen there.
And what's the significance of her doing her laundry?
Washing dirty linen is to sort out all the little shadow things one has done, to dwell on them. You see, generally, if we do some mischief against our will, if we do some harm to our friends or forget something important or so, we are for a moment aware of it, but we push it aside, we forget about it as quickly as possible. We said, oh yes, that's annoying, and in the afternoon already one has forgotten, while the good things one remembers all the time. And so one accumulates a lot of dirty linen and has from time to time to do washing. Actually, a psychotherapeutic treatment is mostly washing dirty linen. People say, my friend said that and that gossip against me and I got angry and so, and then you find out that there is a shadow projection upon each other. Both project the shadow upon each other, and it comes out in petty little quarrels and jealousies and so on. That's dirty linen.
Isn't it interesting that at the very moment that she's doing her laundry, she suddenly starts dancing with this peculiar woman that she has to hold up?
That weightless woman is probably again another shadow figures of her, another part of her personality which has no weight, no substance. We say about somebody what they say has no weight, or they as a personality have no weight. And that is somehow they have no psychic solidity, no substance. One doesn't feel the other person as somebody substantial. And that comes because she doesn't, what gives us substance, strangely enough, is our shadow. Our shadow is the positive thing. That girl's shadow is weightless because she does the washing of the dirty linen outside. That means probably she enjoys a lot of gossipy, criticizing other people among colleagues and so on, but never takes it home. She never takes it home to herself. She never asks, and me, what am I doing to the others? She hasn't realized her shadow yet, and therefore her other personality is weightless in a negative sense.
In the last part of the dream, she's surprised to find that her friend Sue has hung up her brother. Her association with the brother was that she's supporting his education.
We can take the brother Jan, who is hung up, as her own possibility of studying and making a mental career, probably her mind personality. That is the masculine side in the woman, her mind, somebody who goes for a university career in herself. She probably neglects that, or rather perhaps she cannot live it in her present profession, and therefore it is projected onto her brother. She gives all her money and devotion to the brother that he can make a career, and kind of vicariously then enjoys the brother studying, while she actually should do that herself. By that she quits developing her own career further. Obviously, she is a girl who should not stay in the hostess business, but has a good mind and should go for a change of profession. But her Sue shadow hangs up that brother, and her Sue shadow would be in her that mechanism which projects onto the brother, the man who makes a career, the person who makes a career, and sees it outside instead of seeing inside. She has therefore to take down the brother, and then he might drop 12 floors down. The great danger is that if she would realize that she herself has to do what she's paying her brother to do for her, she might drop. And to drop in a dream has generally to do with a sudden disappointment and giving everything up. To let oneself drop into nothingness, so to speak. That would be a reaction in her to say, oh, I am hopeless, and nothing will ever come out of me, I can't make it, I give up. And then just throw herself away into the street, literally, and not make the effort to build up her own personal life. And that is a dangerous moment of transition when she therefore takes that brother down and brings him in, to bring him into the flat. Her flat is in the 12th floor, would mean to bring home, instead of saying, well, why am I paying the career of my brother? Is it not me, myself, who needs to do something more than being a hostess? That would be bringing home the brother into her own inner realm. And that is a dangerous enterprise she has to, which is recommended at the end of the dream, and which she seems in the dream to succeed to do so.
What about that section of the dream in which the dreamer is discussing with her mother the possibility of leaving Sue and moving into a one-bedroom apartment with her mother?
The mother is a down-to-earth, practical person, therefore would probably represent in her somebody who suggests always a shortcut, practical solution. Now, the shortcut, practical solution, if your shadow annoys you, is to avoid him, to go away and have your flat on your own, to not live with Sue. That would mean the most practical thing is to repress the shadow. You see that when you want to talk to people about their shadow, they just switch conversation. They say, oh, by the way, I wanted to tell you, and they talk about something else. That's the practical way of getting rid of Sue. But it's not really practical. It's practical at the moment, but one pays for it later.
Why is it that dreams tend to use close friends to reveal the shadow side of the personality?
Because generally one makes friends with one shadow figure. Tell me who your friends are, and I have the whole panorama of your good and bad qualities. The bad qualities have also an attraction, a fascination for one. The friend can do the things one cannot do. The friend is generally the person whom one envies. The friend is more elegant, or dances better, or can move about better in outer life, or has depth, and has a better mind or something, and that is fascinating. So there is always a kind of love-hatred with the shadow. And with one's friends, if one hasn't worked on one's shadow, one has with one's friend also generally a love-hatred relationship.
In the next dream, the male figure appears in a very negative form, but the dreamer handles him very easily.
Okay, I had this dream about being at a large airport. It was a large city airport. There's people everywhere. It was very crowded. And there were also a lot of guns. There was people shooting. I don't know. It was a lot of confusion. It was big and it was crowded and it was noisy. There was this one guy that he seemed to have it out for me, kept following me around. And I kept hiding from him. And wherever I went, he would find me. And he kept aiming this rifle at me. And I didn't like it. And I was really frightened. And so I kept hiding. And he'd come back. And at one point, I finally looked at him and I said, listen, I don't want to die. I don't like this stuff with you aiming your rifle at me. And he went away. He got up and left.
Now here we have no longer what we call the shadow, because it is a contrasexual figure which turns up, an unknown man who points a rifle at the dreamer. First there are just rifles everywhere and shooting around and a scary situation. Now, thinking of the dreamer as a hostess, we can say that she might any minute get into such a situation with the modern terrorist methods and so on, and it probably picks up that situation. The dream picks up that fantasy and brings it into reality, and there is a kind of psychological chaos in her when it comes to the masculine side of her personality. That has to do with the dreamer having had very little contact with her father, and in those cases in a woman there is no pre-formation to relate positively to a man in later life, because the first experience of a man in her life is practically missing. And therefore one has this chaotic situation. She doesn't know really how men are and how to relate to men. She knows how to put a grey mist around her and appear as the attractive woman to them. But when it comes to establishing a human relationship, she is in falls into a scary chaos. But then one man singles himself out in the situation, which is a progress in the dream. a confrontation with the man, but he's unknown, so it would be the man, how she experiences him outside of herself, and also her own masculinity, being in a woman, knowing what she wants, goal-orientedness, willpower, strength, all these qualities which she needs.
Well, a male figure is certainly not hung up in this dream.
This man has pointing a rifle at her. A rifle in general is a phallic masculine symbol, and again points to pointedness, to goal orientation, to accurate, to be able to want something and to accurately have it in mind and go for it. And that is, in a woman generally, a more unconscious quality, and therefore appears either projected onto men or as an inner masculine figure. And this man points the rifle negatively at her. He threatens her, and she becomes frightened. And then she suddenly realizes that he is responsible for her scary situation, not she. In general, when the counter-sexual inner figure in a woman, the animus, is negative towards her, that takes form in having very sharp negative judgments about oneself. You are nobody, you will never make it, men don't like you, they only want to have sex with you, but nobody loves you, you'll never find a husband, you are not really a good woman, your life will always go on as meaninglessly as it's now, and these kind of destructive thoughts, self-destructive thoughts, which put themselves between her and her femininity and her possibility of relating to an outer man in a positive sense. And therefore it is a great progress in the dream that she wakes up suddenly and thinks, it's not me, it's that man, and he's responsible. That's as if she could in that moment disentangle and realize that those negative thoughts are something outside of her. It's not herself. As if she would say, it's not me thinking that. It's only something in me thinking that, which I need not to believe.
Can the animus be transformed as easily as that? Just by bringing it to consciousness?
I remember once I dreamt that a murderous burglar came into my bedroom, and I woke up with a cry of fear, and I went through what I had thought the evening before. I had had a very peaceful, quiet day before, which didn't amount for such a terrible dream. And then I remembered that before going to bed, I thought, the book I'm writing is all nonsense and I must throw it away. And I thought, I thought that. Then when I had the dream, I thought, no, I don't think that. It thinks that in me, and I needn't believe it. And I could disentangle from the negative thought. I don't accept it. And the miracle happens in our dream that by realizing this, what is that negative stuff in me which always says you are nobody and you'll never relate properly to a man, blah, 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 blah. That's not me. At that moment he gets up and walks away. It's as difficult and as simple as all that. The dream shows her, if only you can wake up and see that this isn't you, you can send that devil who gives you those negative thoughts against you away from you, and then you can develop as a woman.
Von Franz has emphasized that the face that we turn to the unconscious is the face that is reflected back to us. In other words, if we are angry, we often get an angry response back from the unconscious. If we are diffident, the same kind of diffidence comes back to us. It's very important when we feel ourselves being chased by a demon that we stop and hold. Instead of running, some people run for a lifetime away from this thing that is running after them. If we can just stop and turn around and say, what do you want? Bring in all the strength you've got to say it, or to look this thing in the face. It's amazing how you may get an answer, and it will tell you what it wants. It may say, I want to love you. I want to know you. I want you to know me. And the demonic may suddenly become its opposite.
A band of cowboys shoot pregnant women and children. An ex-husband and his friends stop a woman from swimming a river. Christ appears as a furry dog with golden eyes. A woman's inner man can make her life heaven or hell. In his negative form, he's a seductive swindler who cuts a woman off from her feminine identity. But in his positive role, he brings her spiritual strength and connects her to the self.
In this sort of open stretch of river, in the water, a group of people, including my nearly ex-husband and a colleague of his who I was quite fond of. And I found that they wouldn't let me swim. I really like moving when I swim, and every time I started, I found that they were restricting me. And this made me feel very unhappy, and I woke up at that point.
Many men say that the day they got married, the relationship was over. Put the ring on the finger and the woman disappeared. Is there any truth in that?
Jung once said, women are absolutely lovely and charming and chase the men till they reach the point of being married, and then they transform into devils and harass the man from morning till evening and so on. And that is because marriage is a being pinned down into a specific destiny and situation, and something in the woman resents it. Before you are married, you can dream about what you could do, would do. You can dream about marrying a film reporter and traveling all over the world, or marrying a rich man and doing this, or marrying a farmer and having your own farm, or whatever your desires are. Your life is full of possibilities. But as soon as you marry that man you love and you want to marry, then you are pinned down to him for better and for worse, and something freedom-loving in the woman resents it. And that's why generally these kind of negative animus, contrasexual figures come up and attack them. And that becomes very often even worse during pregnancy, because as long as there is not a child on the way, one can still toy with the idea one might divorce. But if a child is on the way, then one is really pinned down for the next 10, 15 years for sure. And therefore, the wild, freedom-loving side in a woman revolts and attacks negatively.
A few weeks ago, when I was entering my 5th month of pregnancy, I had a very unsettling dream. I've been having quite a few, and other women in my prenatal class have been saying they've been having rather upsetting, nightmarish type dreams, but this one for me was particularly upsetting. I was standing out in a field, and there were fields all around me, nice rolling hills to one side. On my left side there was a farmhouse, a big old farmhouse that could hold a lot of people. And I realized I was part of sort of a ranch farm commune. Just then I looked up to my right and saw some cowboys riding down a hill who were also part of the commune. When they reached the bottom of the hill, they started shooting at people that were coming out of the house, mainly women, children, pregnant women, old people. And I was very upset to see this and asked what they were doing, and they said that the only way they could make a profit was to get rid of the surplus people, that the commune could feed everyone then, but to make a really good profit they'd have to get rid of some people.
This is a typical dream which many pregnant women have. The state of pregnancy, especially for a modern active woman, a very difficult state, because for the sake of pregnancy and for the coming child, the woman should fall into a state of musing, brooding, quietness. Pregnant women should be able to live a quiet rhythm of life. And naturally their own impulse towards action and outer activity comes into conflict with that.
In this dream I was coming up Pitchcombe Hill, and I was on a bicycle with a group of friends, and I was amazed by how much puff I had as I was coming up this hill, and I felt full of vitality. I was actually able to overtake some of the people that I was cycling with. When we got near the top of the hill, I noticed great clouds coming over and that we were going to have a storm. Some of the men that I was with suggested that we stop to wait till the storm passed. So we got off our bicycles near the top and looked down across the valley. Then we saw a huge wave in the distance, and out of this wave came some enormous fish which slithered along the ground and came towards us. One of the men that I was with said that he thought they must have come all the way from the South Seas, and then he said that he felt that the Armageddon was coming. At this I felt slight panic, but also a comfortable feeling because I was surrounded by friends and I felt that it would be all right.
How can a pregnant woman deal with her negative animus?
Generally the poor husband has to pay for that. He's the one who caused it. He has put her into that pregnant situation and into that pinned-down situation. And modern women then say, now I'm always confined to this flat, and I cannot fulfill my personality, and I cannot do what I want to do, and it's his fault. Though she wanted to marry him, it's now his fault.
And what's the solution to that?
That she does as much as she can develop her personality, that she doesn't discard, that she says, now I have my husband and I wanted him and I have a child and I wanted that child and that's all right, but that doesn't prevent me from developing what else I have and want to do. We have to do simply both. Continue to develop your independent personality and accept the earthly confinement in faith. Naturally, one can't have the penny and the cake. I often say to young women, look here, you wanted that husband, you wanted those children, now you can't throw it all over and go to the university and become a university professor. You have to make a compromise. But you can, for instance, study, do some studying in spite of having children, and prepare to later build up a more masculine career when the children are older and go to school, and then there's still a second half of life where a woman can fulfill her more masculine desires, how to live.
In this dream, the male figure takes a very different form.
Well, in this dream, I was in a very dark, deep cave and swimming. The water was very dark, and at the far end of the cave there was an enormous rock, and on the rock there was a small ginger-colored furry dog with gold eyes, and the animal was smiling at me, and I knew that this little dog represented the Christ. I don't know how I knew that, but I knew it.
Now this is the idea of the inner Christ in the depth of the soul. He's not out there in the sky, as Christian teaching wants to have it, or in some metaphysical spiritual realm. He's in the depth of the earth, and the earth is an image for matter, for our body, for our physical existence. And in the cave is, so to speak, has always been a sacred place in former ages, and long after we didn't live anymore in caves, the sanctuaries were still in caves. They were, so to speak, in the womb of the goddess Earth, or the goddess of nature. So the cave is the depth of the inner nature. And the dream says Christ is not some model figure as you have been taught, a spiritual something you have to follow. It is something which you find when you go into the depth of your own being. Then in the womb of Mother Earth you find him. But he appears in a strange form. He appears as a dog. The dog, the zoologist Konrad Lorenz once said, the dog was the greatest and best conquest man ever made, by taming the dog and making him his companion. He is that representative of the animal kingdom who has adapted most to us. I mean, that's why we can take him even into our houses, and compared to the cat, he's much more domesticated. He has really given up his whole way of life and sacrificed it to become our companion. Probably the dogs were accepted by man because of his hunting quality. They helped the hunting gathering societies in the hunting, and later they became the shepherd dogs who were protecting and keeping the herds together, and the watchdog protecting from robbers and burglars and danger. So the dog has become a tremendous cherished helper of man in all his most former important jobs, and therefore he carries the projection of being the companion, the best friend and companion of man, the psychopomp. In modern dreams, very often, generally, the dog represents also our instinctual nature, which has much more flair. The dog is oriented by his nose. Dogs are short-sighted. They don't see very far, but they hear very well, and their nose is 20 times better than ours. And so he represents the instinctual flair or intuition, where our computerized mind doesn't know any further way. The dog sniffs it. Dogs have a strange relationship to the other world, to the land of the dead and the land of the ghosts and the land where the dreams come from, to that what we call the unconscious, because of their instinctual nature. For instance, in practically all religions of the world, the dog is the guide of the dead in the other world. When the people have died, they have trouble to find the beyond, and the land of the ancestors, or the paradise, or the underworld, Miklan, or whatever the beyond of the dead is in every religion. And there's everywhere the idea that there is a dog who has to be older as a guide to bring the dead there. Therefore, in the whole civilizations, Mongolian older Mongolian civilizations, the dog of the master was always buried with the master, the horse and the dog. And when a pregnant woman died, one gave her 2 dogs in the grave, one for her and one for the not yet born child, and to guide them in the other world. And for instance, in Persia, in old Persia, when somebody was dying, one brought a dog in, and the dying person had to give a bit of bread or meat to the dog as a ritual, so as to order the dog he should then come and guide him in the other world. In many places, also in Africa, dogs are sacrificed for that reason on the grave of people. So the dog has a strange relationship to the underworld, which we have still in the Greek Cerberus figure, who is a 3-headed dog. The most famous dog figure of the land of the beyond is probably the Egyptian god Anubis, who has a jackal head. He was the god who surveyed embalming, and embalming was transforming the dead person into an immortal divine person, a deification of the dead by a treatment of the corpse. And actually, while the embalming or the deification of the dead ritual was performed, a priest with a jackal head mask was superveying it. Anubis, he was called the agent of resurrection. He was guiding one through the other world. Now, there is absolutely, one cannot draw any line between what we call the unconscious and the land of the dead. What most mythologies and religions describe as the land of the dead is what we would call the unconscious. And therefore you can say the dog is the one leader to the other world, to the dream world. He's the God, the guiding God in the unconscious. And that's why in our dream it is very fitting that Christ is a dog, because he's a guardian of souls. He's what watches over her soul and guides her in the darkness of the unknown. The golden quality which is stressed in the dream refers to immortality, because gold is the only metal the former people knew which is not corroded by old age or by acids or so on. You can bury gold and you can dig it up after 5,000 years absolutely unaltered, while silver, copper, iron, everything rusts and goes away. And so gold had carried always the projection of immortality, eternity, and highest value, even to the fact that we still have gold as the value standard of our monetary system, though many people say that's quite useless from a practical standpoint. But it has a symbolic value. Gold is the highest value, and that's why in most civilizations the figures of the divine figures are painted in gold or decorated, the statues are decorated with gold, and so on, to stress that it is eternal, shining, immortal, everlasting. And so the woman realizes this golden dog is Christ, so to speak, the way how Christ appears within her. He would be an image of what we call the self, of the inner guiding principle.
Is this image of the self masculine or feminine?
The dog in this dream is still more or less a masculine figure as identified with Christ, and that is one of the problems of our civilization, that we have no divine feminine figure. If a divine feminine figure appears, it's generally in the form of a kind of earth mother goddess or wise old woman. I just remember a dream of a pregnant woman. She was very annoyed by her pregnancy. She had a negative relationship to her own mother, and women who have a negative relationship to their own mother generally have also difficulty with pregnancies, vomiting, physical discomfort, resentment against having to have a child, and so on. They don't enjoy pregnancy. And she was one of those women. She felt hot and uncomfortable and was very unhappy during her pregnancy, till she dreamt that she was sitting in the earth in a cave, looking at her pregnant belly. And suddenly she realized that there was a floor above her, a transparent floor, and above her was a superior woman. It was actually a woman she knew and onto whom she projected herself. But if we had asked her, she would have said it is a woman who knows more and is a wise woman who knows about the secrets of life. And this wise woman above her was praying to the stars, making a ritual and praying to the stars, and through her prayer drops of water of life were dripping down from the stars and coming and flowing through the transparent floor and assembling in her womb and quickening and nourishing the child. And she realized that this wise woman, the superior woman figure, was helping her to carry the child and so that the child would come out right. And she woke up very relieved, and from then on she could accept her pregnancy. There the self appeared to her in order to help her to fulfill her task as a mother.
In this dream, the male figure appears as a disembodied voice.
This is one of those rare dreams in which an authoritative male voice told me with absolute certainty what I must do. I was translating Anglo-Saxon, and it came to an extremely difficult passage. I was translating the 2nd chapter of Matthew, and I came to the 2nd verse, and I couldn't understand it. And then a voice said to me, "This is your lodestar." And I woke up. And when I looked up the passage in the Bible, it read, "Where is he that is born King of the Jews? For we have seen his star in the east, and we have come to worship him." And then I looked up the word lodestar in the dictionary. And a lodestar is a guiding star, a star on which one fixes all one's hopes and one's attention. And it acts as a magnet to the soul that's following it. And that dream I had 10 years ago, and the full meaning of it I'm just beginning to realize.
She is occupied in translating the Christian revelation which comes from the East into her own psychological setup and language, which is a process of assimilating it, of understanding it in her own way, instead of just believing what she's been told. And there she has difficulty with the passage, "That's your lodestar." The lodestar means the guiding star, like the Star of Bethlehem, to which it afterwards alludes quite clearly. It is that passage which alludes to the Star of Bethlehem, which guided the kings towards the newborn little child, Jesus. The guiding star we had already before in Gilgamesh, as being the principle of individuation, one's innermost divine destiny or cosmic destiny, the meaning of one's life, what guides one towards the absolute individual meaning of one's own individual life. And the dreamer has a difficulty first to find that lodestar. But then she discovers that it is Matthew 2:2, which is alluding to the Star of Bethlehem. That means a star which indicates a divine birth. In antiquity, one always thought that if a new bright star appeared in the sky, a future ruler or wise man or great man who would save mankind has appeared on earth. And that is behind the story of the Star of Bethlehem. So the dream tells her that just where she has difficulty of still difficulties of understanding, she will in her innermost being find that Christ is born within her own soul. The Christ child represents the saving factor which is born within oneself. We are not divine, but we are the stable in which something divine is born.
There's a painting of Holman Hunt's in which Christ is portrayed carrying a lantern and knocking on the doorway of the heart.
There you have the Animus in his positive function as the guide towards inner truth. You have, for instance, very often in dreams of women, male angels, or if you think of the French Saint Jeanne d'Arc, she was always guided by the Archangel Michael and advised by the Archangel Michael in her political and heroic career. So that would be the positive animus whom I would call an innermost instinctual awareness of the inner truth, a basic inner truthfulness, which becomes a guiding spirit for a woman towards her individuation, towards becoming her own self. That is the opposite to the negative animus, who is a big swindler.
So you don't feel that masculinity in a woman is necessarily negative?
The masculinity is just as exceedingly positive as negative. It's only in certain aspects negative, and mainly negative when women don't know how to have the wisdom and don't know how to relate to it. A woman who has no animus, has no pep, no enterprise, no intelligence, no initiative. She's a very poor creature. She's just a womb producing children and a hand cooking in the kitchen. That's a woman without animus is nothing. So the animus is just as much an exceedingly positive thing. It is the intelligence, it's the spiritual longing, it's the whole spirituality of woman is connected with the animus. But you can say the animus, therefore, has the range of extension between devil and Holy Ghost.
Do you feel a woman should be educated and have a career?
A woman should be educated and should have a career, but she should not be possessed by it. She should not be carried away by it. Otherwise she loses her feminine identity. But if she keeps her feminine identity, then it adds to her personality a spiritual dimension of activity, intelligence, willpower, and all positive qualities. Makes her into a personality. Jung was always very much for women studying. He said that women who don't make a career or study or do some profession have generally even much worse animus. They lead a seemingly feminine life at home as mothers and householders, but their masculinity then becomes something sour and negative with which they torture their husband. It's much better to occupy the animus, then he makes less mischief.